Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Welcome to a special podcast episode today. I am joined by the creator of One Shot. You may have heard of the podcast before, James D'Amato. He lives in Chicago, and he has been doing podcasting for an extremely long amount of time in the world of role-playing. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
It is my honor completely to have you on the podcast. James, thank you so much for being here. How did you get into tabletop role-playing?
I didn't start doing any sort of tabletop role-playing until I got into college. My freshman year of college, there was this gaming club organization on campus called Argo, which is the Allegheny Role-Playing and Gaming Organization. And they were hosting a Intro to Dungeons & Dragons game. And I initially was not into Dungeons & Dragons, like even as an idea. I was a nerd already, like going to college, and I didn't want to like get caught up in something that I thought at the time very foolishly, oh, this will make you an even bigger nerd. But there was this girl that I was trying to introduce myself to. And she got into the Intro to D&D game. So I ended up asking one of my buddies to drop out of the game so that I could get in and talk to her. So I actually started role-playing to meet women. So I am legitimately a fake geek boy.
Oh my goodness. I mean, normally that is not something that happens, getting into gaming to date women.
Yeah, well,
normally that stereotype exists. Nowadays.
So, I kind of feel like my story isn't so unusual anymore. Like, when I go to conventions these days, at least amongst the younger crowd, I see, like, we're almost at gender parity. And, there are a lot of not just young straight people out there, but there are young queer people out there, like, meeting at conventions. So I think, like, we're in the phase of a brave new world where people can celebrate this hobby and meet each other while doing so.
Absolutely. I started role-playing in college, but I had started gathering the books when I was in high school with like the second edition Complete Guide to Elves or Complete Guide to Dwarves type class books for D&D. But college is where I started, and then even at that point in time when like 3 and 3.5 came out for Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons, if you saw a girl walk into the comic/gaming shop, there was some awkwardness amongst the people that were in that shop and from the person coming in. And, it's disappointing, but I was glad to finally be a part of groups later on in college where it was like about a 50-50 split between men and women playing the games, and that was always fun.
Yeah, and I think that's ideal. I love these games so much. I see them as something that is for everyone. So I, especially through my shows and through events that I run, I try to make it a comfortable space for anybody who would want to go in it. And I sort of see that as the duty of the community surrounding role-playing games, because we want these games to be successful and because we want the hobby to be as big as possible, because that means more and new and better games. We got to make it a welcoming environment as well.
Absolutely. What are some of your favorite games that you've played? I mean, it's hard to ask you that question because you've played a bunch of different games, from the major games to the smaller independent games that are coming out. I know that you frequently have games on that are backed on Kickstarters. I know that the most recent game that you had on One Shot was the Rock Band game that's coming out. And for the life of me, I can't remember that name of the...
was that Rockalypse? Or no, Damn the Man Save the Music?
No, Damn the Man Save the Music, yes, which I had backed Hannah Schaefer's Noirlandia, and then it came up in like one of the emails, like, "Oh, look at this new game that we're doing," and that's like an insta back right there.
Oh yeah, Hannah is a really, really talented designer, and I am a big fan of Damn the Man. Most of Hannah's designs, and I pointed this out to her on Twitter, and she's like, "Wow, I've never had anybody really point that out before." Is that Hannah's designs are like bleak uh, and sort of depressing, but like there are elements of hope in them because Hannah has done Questlandia, which is about worlds that are like on the precipice of apocalypse, and Noirlandia, which is noir, which in and of itself is kind of a depressing genre, and 14 Days, which is about dealing with chronic pain. Uh, Damn the Man Save the Music is like still like you're on a record store that is threatened to be closed, but you're developing relationships with other people in the store, and it's like more that feel good Empire Records vibe to it than anything else. So it's the most joyous game that Hannah's ever made, and I liked it a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, when I saw the description, immediately Empire Records came to mind, and a role playing game that's Empire Records related or even close to it in the same vein is something that I would love to play with.
Well, cool. I do play a lot of games, as you pointed out earlier. I think for one shot, I feel like we've featured almost 50 games. Like personally, I feel like the number of games that I have played is like varying systems is creeping up on 100 now, and I've
Hmm.
certainly read like well over 200 games at this point in my life as a gamer. And I circle back around to favorites mostly. I think nostalgia plays heavily into it, but there are certain designs that like really stick out to me and really work well with my GMing style. I really like Feng Shui. Um, Both the original game and Feng Shui 2, which is sort of a like souped up version of it that plays a little bit easier. That's an action movie role playing system designed by Robin Laws, and that game really fosters player creativity with the character abilities. It's my favorite example is there's an ability that gives you +1 to hit with an improvised weapon, so long as you never use it on the same weapon twice. So it's that Jackie Chan style thing where you're constantly looking around the fictional environment for new things to use against your opponent. So I just love that game because whether you're an experienced player or somebody who is just starting to get into it, like you've seen an action movie before, and the character sheet sort of guides you into making a really visually interesting experience for your mind's eye. And beyond that, I think my second favorite game these days is Dread, which is a horror game that instead of using dice or cards or any other normal mechanic, there's a Jenga tower in the middle of the table. And when characters want to do something that has the risk of failure, they have to pull a brick from the tower and place it on top like you would when playing Jenga. And if the tower falls over, they die. So
Oh my gosh.
there's like a physical totem essentially in the middle of the table reminding players that their characters can die. And so it makes not only like you can tell an intense horror story, but the actual physical game mechanic makes the game anxiety inducing and interesting and fun. Any GM can make a Dread game interesting. If you don't know horror as a genre, Dread can teach you how to tell a good horror story. And for that reason, I just think it's one of the most brilliantly designed games ever, and the actual bare mechanics of it can fit on a single note card. But there is a wonderful book that is attached to it as well. But yeah, I'd say those are the big two that I really love, and I have great fondness for almost all the designs that I see.
With the advent of Kickstarter, there's been almost a deluge of new role-playing games, spin-offs of games, reimagining of games from like long past. What's your thoughts as far as is the Kickstarter a great like I feel with role-playing games it's a great platform to get like people's work out there because it's just so accessible. Like you instead of having to go into a store and see if they're carrying it or trying to track it down, you put in $10, you get a PDF like at the like for a minimum, and you've got that access to like almost the like anything imaginable as far as gaming at this point. Because I mean, there's Hannah Schaefer's games. There's been the White Wolf reimaginings from Onyx Path or the revisions. Monty Cook's games have all launched on Kickstarter. I mean, it's incredible to see what's coming out.
Well, I think what we're seeing with Kickstarter, rather than comparing it to a brick and mortar game store, which I still see as a thing that has a lot of value, I see Kickstarter as a replacement for the traditional publishing model. I think RPGs, since their inception in the 70s, have suffered from the fact that the publishing industry doesn't really work for role-playing games. And even with the giants like Tactical Strategies Rules, becoming Wizards of the Coast, it has never, ever worked for us. And even the largest companies have sort of suffered at the behest of the publishing industry. And Kickstarter, it finally brings us a platform where people can tell you that they're interested in a product, and you only have to make as many units as there are people interested. And like, if you make more, you can make enough to cover like a second print run or something, but you're never locked into a distribution model where you're producing 5,000 units merely to satisfy minimum printing conditions, and then you don't have to warehouse 4,000 units when you only manage to sell 1,000. It has changed publishing forever. So now a company like Magpie Games, which publishes Masks and Bluebeard's Bride and a bunch of other really great games that you can see through Kickstarter and is becoming like one of the larger publishers in the industry, they can put out a game, and somebody who's just had an idea that they've managed to write down on paper can put out a game, and everybody is on that equal playing field starting out. I mean, obviously, a company like Magpie or Atlas or Green Ronin, who are established names in the industry, have an advantage because they already have an audience. But somebody is not forced into sinking their life savings into making an idea work. And for role-playing games, like as we've seen over the last couple of years, like you're absolutely right, there's a deluge of new ideas that are coming into the industry. And we're getting more and more niche markets of role-playing games created because they finally have an opportunity to connect with an audience. It is the best period that there has ever been for role-playing. Because even with Kickstarter, like we don't need to make print books. As you pointed out earlier, you can make a PDF. You can kickstart just distributing a PDF. So your costs are really whatever it takes to create and lay out a book, and then you send it off through email for free, and you're done. It is wonderful. It is a wonderful time to be a publisher. It is a wonderful time to be a creator, and it's a wonderful time to be a fan. Because if you want something, it's probably out there.
Absolutely. And I know one of the other things that I love right before we get off the Kickstarter talk is I love that international games that have only been published in their native language, some of them are finally coming to be translated into English, and I'm really digging that.
I think one of the most wonderful things that Kickstarter has given us is Japanese role-playing games. If you didn't know, Japan got Dungeons and Dragons a couple years before video games really took off. So like around when Dungeons and Dragons was at the top of the market in the United States. They got D&D, and they had D&D for like a year or two before video games almost completely eclipsed the tabletop market. And there is a small design scene that had been incubating in Japan really up until like, I can't remember when Made was translated, but probably like 2006,
Hmm.
2009. But they had their own design culture. Like they got D&D, that was pretty much the big game that Japan got to see from America. I think like Shadowrun also came over, but way later. And so they took D&D and they just went in completely fascinating and different directions. The play style in Japan is completely different. So now getting Japanese games translated into English, we can see a completely alien design culture that has like really just started from the same root materials and sprung off into something completely new and wonderful. Games like Shinobi Gami, which is a one-shot style ninja dueling game that combines combat mechanics with intense interpersonal and investigative mechanics,
Hmm.
is one of the games that I'm most excited about coming from Japan. And it evolved out of play that like is completely the antithesis of campaign style play, which is what most designers are chasing after in the United States. And it's just something that I am so grateful to Kickstarter for, that because we would not have had the opportunity to even look at these designs. And now we can take them in, play them, and make our own games based off of them. Like it's created up a wonderful bridge of cultural communication that just didn't exist before.
Absolutely. When I was over in Japan teaching in '04 to '06, the only role playing games that I found that I could recognize were Dungeons and Dragons, and then they had some Japanese versions of White Wolf's Vampire the Masquerade, and
Yeah.
then everything else was like card games. At least when I was in the stores that I frequented.
And Japan has also been able to export the idea of the replay, which I think podcasts have maybe eclipsed. Podcasts and streams probably have eclipsed the idea of a replay ever really taking hold in the United States. But we use it in designing books and helping people understand the rules. In Japan, what is almost more popular than role playing games is people transcribing role playing games, like in whole, like in and out of character dialogue and writing it down. And people will go into a gaming store and buy a bound published copy of somebody else playing a role playing game and just read that story. So it's like an actual play podcast, just published as a digest novel. Um,
Wow.
and like you can see in Hannah Schaefer's games, when she designs something, she always includes a replay. Questlandia famously and I think ingeniously would have rules on one page and the replay on the other page, so you could see the rule being implemented as you were reading the rule.
Hmm.
So like it's something that has influenced a lot of indie designs in the US, and I think is just a really neat cultural artifact that again we got because Kickstarter helped make us interested in the Japanese role-playing scene.
Right. Now, how did you get into podcasting as far as doing like gaming podcasts?
So I had been podcasting about a year before I started One Shot. I did an improv podcast with my buddy Alex Manich, who has appeared on multiple One Shot episodes, and we got picked up by a podcast network in Chicago called Peaches and Hot Sauce, which is sadly no longer operating. But we worked with Peaches and Hot Sauce for about like 6 months before the head of the network, Patrick O'Rourke, came to me and said that he had been listening to a show called Nerd Poker on Earwolf. And if you don't know Nerd Poker, it's Brian Posehn, the stand-up comedian's actual play podcast, where I think they played like a D&D second edition and fourth edition. Pat knew that I was a role playing like fan, and so he came to me and said, "I really like this show. Is there a way that you could develop something like this for our network?" So I listened to Nerd Poker and I really enjoyed it. And I checked out like what other shows were out there doing this role playing thing. Um, And what I found is a lot of people playing Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. There were, I think, I found like a dozen different people through podcasts and YouTube and all sorts of other mediums playing through Rise of the Rune Lords and just, recording it for other people to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, in college, in my nerd club, there was a wide and diverse interest in role playing games, and we played more than just D&D. Like D&D is what I started on, and I still have a great affection for it. But I got introduced to so many other wonderful things, and I wanted out of my show to show off what I thought the wonderful diversity in the role playing market was. I had only played about 10 games at that time, and I thought I was like hot shit who knew a lot about games. I very quickly into doing one shot realized like exactly how much was out there, but I wanted to do a show where we could investigate and sample different systems. Maybe some of them would be good, maybe some of them would be bad, but we would all sort of like struggle through it together and learn new things and explore new territory. So the format of One Shot was really just designed so we could have this Epicurean approach to role playing. And that was all about 4 years ago. It'll be 4 years coming up in August.
And that is incredible, because when I started re-listening to podcasts, because I had gotten out of podcasts for a long time, but One Shot was the one that was first recommended to me that I needed to check out. One Shot and Campaign.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can see why. Campaign, I think, is probably the best thing that we do on the network. I'm very proud of One Shot, but I definitely know that there are some episodes that are better than others. Campaign is just like a consistently wonderful story and has been for the past 80 episodes or so. I really enjoy listening to Campaign, even though like I'm in the thing.
Are there any favorites that you've had on One Shot that, I mean, I know it's hard to like just say, oh, I liked X over Y, but is there any particular episodes that you think really highlight the games, that if people are maybe curious about the game but don't want to invest the money just yet, that maybe your episodes would help push them over?
So we try to like it's an interesting choice, and it actually comes down to the theory of entertainment versus being pure to the game. Like there are a bunch of episodes that we have played where people have like come to us later and gone, you didn't really play this by the book, or you guys stepped pretty wide outside the setting, or you
Mm-hmm.
ignored this rule set entirely. And a lot of the time, what I am trying to do with One Shot is show off what I see as the spirit of the game. And that is like pick the most interesting mechanic and highlight that, or pick the most unique thing about the setting and explore that. And there are some times where I get a group of improvisers together, and like a couple minutes into playing, I realize, oh, this group is going to go in a completely different direction, and I guess this will just be a weird one. If you've heard our Urban Shadows episode, it is a very, very silly and funny episode, but it is not anything like what Urban Shadows is supposed to be. Um, so, like a lot of the time, I am trying to show off the game in its best light, and you might not get the most depth of mechanics, and you might not have a complete understanding of how the game works after listening to an episode of One Shot. But I would hope that you can see like the threads of the story and like how you could make your own game out of the material that we were given. Some episodes that I think show off their systems really well. I'm always really proud of anything that we've done in Feng Shui. Like the first Inspector Jackie series and second Inspector Jackie series were great. And the third one that we recorded is a blast, and I can't wait to show it off to people. It's my favorite game, so I worked really hard to represent it well. And that, to me, of course, means going way off book with the story and world, and like celebrating the characters and the mechanics and what the game can make them do. Um, I also was talking very recently with Darcy Ross, who recently got hired by Monty Cook Games. Congratulations,
Hmm.
Darcy! About the episodes of Numenera that she ran for us. And Numenera, huge game, like a pretty wild world and setting. And we had a very silly session of it, but I think we got to show off some really good stuff about Numenera. And it's an enjoyable thing that I think anybody can listen to those episodes and come to appreciate not just the fun that we were having with it, but Numenera itself as a setting and game. Um, and finally, I'll say Inspectors. Inspectors is a Ghostbuster style comedy system.
And it's
And
wonderful.
yeah, we've run 3 games of it so far, and I have enjoyed every minute that we play with that group. I really want to get them together to play another game because those guys are hysterical.
Yeah, Inspectors. I had the joy of getting to play it with the gaming group up in North Carolina, and it was just a wonderful time. It's so out of the norm of playing Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or your Call of Cthulhu type games. It's just so much fun. I mean, it's just wacky, and you just can go in so many different directions.
I think one of the things that helps it lend itself to comedy is that it's the opposite of this power fantasy that we normally have with role playing games. Because Inspectors is you're slowly wearing down these workaday characters that are essentially the game treats them like they're supernatural plumbers almost. They have a job to do, and their job ends up being fighting ghosts and tackling with Lovecraftian monsters. And you just get worse as the game goes on, and that makes it funnier and funnier to play.
Yeah, if somebody's listening to this episode and you haven't played Inspectors, find a few people and just do it. It's one of those games where it's highly recommended by everyone that's played it. Now, James, I do have to ask you a question because you've been doing gaming as a podcast for a long time, collaborating with players, and how do you work in not only the players but the people listening, the audience?
See, now this is a really interesting topic because actual play podcasts are, in the scope of the role playing industry, are a relatively new phenomenon. And streaming is a new phenomenon on top of that already. We're sort of playing catch up with innovation, and also funnily enough working our way backwards through innovations in technology, because if you look at actual play podcasts and actual play streams, um, it's essentially us doing live television and radio, uh, which have fallen out of favor in our modern media climate. So it's really interesting that these types of entertainment exist at all, and that they're as popular as they are. And I think in the first stage of actual plays that we have seen, we've so far been just trying to export the role playing experience, taking recordings of people playing at a table and showing that off to an audience. And in the first early streams, maybe they didn't have the best audio equipment, and maybe everybody at the table wasn't a performer that you would listen to under normal circumstances, and so the games might not have been as strong. These days, we are getting professional performers who are suited to role playing. I use improvisers because it's not like an actor who is good at conveying a line that has already been written down. It is somebody who is used to coming up with unique things to happen in the moment on stage. So when we have these performers who are specially suited to the task of role playing, we have technology to really export the experience of the game with those players. And we have audiences that can be a part of the game at the table because they're watching it live. So we now, in the role-playing entertainment industry, we are on the precipice of creating something entirely new. I would not be surprised at all if within this year or in the following years, we see games that are made entirely to be streamed, where the stream is part of the experience that the game designer has anticipated and actually folds it into the mechanics of the game. And a little bit of what I'm trying to do with the Dungeon Dome is create a game experience where it's not just the players at the table working with me, it's the audience working with me, not just by sending in ideas, but by being an actual game mechanic. If anybody saw some of the Dungeon Dome streams that we did, the audience could cheer on certain teams that were competing in the Dungeon Dome, and if the teams got enough cheers, they could activate special moves and abilities. So I want to build up like a unique and interesting gaming experience that can really only exist in this space where we don't just have players at the table who are playing characters, we have an audience who is helping play the game with us.
I know that with actual plays, it's really hard for people to get into them if they have been going for a while. I know, when somebody recommended Campaign to me, I was like, oh my gosh, there's like so many episodes to like go back and start from the beginning. And then you just have to kind of pick and choose those podcasts. What's is there a formula for people to jump in, or do you have like a good, like, here's what's happened last time on, or a review episode or something along those lines to get people interested?
So jumping in media res is something that we have been thinking about very tactically at One Shot. Like One Shot in particular is a podcast that is designed where people can jump in at the start of a new series, and because it's only 3 to 5 episodes long, like they can start almost anywhere. If there's a game that they're really interested, a game that's their favorite, they can listen to that episode first and then decide based on that whether they want to join us for other games. For Campaign, at the end of every arc, like we see, maybe being on a particular planet or trying to accomplish a particular task as an arc for our characters. And we try to have an episode where our introductory narrator at the top of the episode will say each of the characters' names, give them a brief description of like their personalities, and set the scene for what has happened. Very similar to the crawl in a Star Wars movie where you get caught up that Leia has been on the run from the evil Galactic Empire trying to deliver the plans of the Death Star. We try to pack that into like the first minute or so of narrative that you hear in Campaign, like every week. But we also have like special areas where like we name every character, we say what's going to happen, and we help people ease into a new part of the story. And we also make sure in those episodes when we're doing our opening shot in the narrative itself, we have the players stop and take the time to describe what their character looks like, any super compelling physical details, before we move on with the story. So somebody who's been listening for a long time, it's not like a clips episode or a review episode where they're going, this is all information I already know. It's a narrative that can keep them entertained while getting new listeners up to speed. But
okay.
There are a lot of different ways of doing it. The McElroys with the Adventure Zone sort of like made that special introductory first episode where they cut out a lot of like the lingering moments in the first part for the Adventure Zone to make it easy for people to get on board. And I know a bunch of people who like will create a review episode that's like, here's what's happened up to this point, here's what you need to know, here are these characters. I don't know which method works the best, honestly. It's hard to gauge whether a certain show is just like gaining momentum through an outside audience normally, or or you're doing a very good job engineering ways for people to join up with your audience.
One of the other things that I've been talking with other podcasters that do actual plays is actual play storytelling, like how they're designing each episode. And originally, when I was thinking about designing, each episode of the game, I was thinking, okay, maybe have combat always be like the last thing people listen to before the episode ends. Is there a formula or something that you do for your shows as far as the storytelling side of things? Do you just go with what's going on and go with the flow? Do you try to have like certain spots, like in the midsection there's something going on, or at the end you end on like a cliffhanger at the start of a battle, or the battle has ended and you transition into something else in the next episode?
So in the beginning, when I first started One Shot, I worked very hard to pace it so that something super interesting or super funny would happen every hour. Because like you want, as an audience member, there's a reason that you should be there with us every hour of the show, because the episodes are an hour long. And I've been doing it so long now that I kind of feel like that has become a subconscious thing. And there is almost every time I'm listening to an episode, like an hour in, I am at an interesting stopping point where I feel like, yeah, in this space that is like 50 minutes to an hour 10, there's something in here that's going to be a great end point for that episode, and we can then resume next week. So it started as very intentional, and then got to be like second nature.
What do you personally look for when you're listening to actual play, either podcasts or streams? What kind of story or what kind of characters, or like what grabs you? What holds on to you as far as something that you would like to listen to?
So the things that I listen to tend to be on the lighter side. I think that's just who I am as a person. 90% of the podcasts that I subscribe to are comedy podcasts, and that's not just actual play. That's everything. But apart from that, I think out of role playing, what I'm really looking for is compelling and detailed descriptions, and people who are not afraid to really inhabit a character and get in depth. I think I always say to people, like, I'm a fan of the Adventure Zone podcast that the McElroys do, but it is a show that didn't really grab me until episode 50 or so. Spoilers for the Adventure Zone, but there is a part in that podcast where there is some time travel stuff happening, and they go back and you get to see into each character's past. And they're offered the opportunity to fix a critical mistake. And in each of those moments that the GM brought up, it provided like critical background for these characters. And for the character of Magnus in particular, it just told this beautiful, tragic story. And the player really leaned into that. Like, I think the other players were like kind of brushed off their big choice. But Travis, who plays Magnus, really let that choice sink in and affect that character. And he like opened himself up to a very vulnerable moment. And that is the sort of role play that I live for. And that's what I'm looking for. I am looking for people who don't just play the game and aren't just entertaining about it. Like, I want people who are willing to go that extra mile to find some sort of character vulnerability to tell me a story that's like really fascinating and really grabs me. And there are only a few shows that I've encountered that have managed to do that. But the great thing about actual play is people are always making more, and that there are a lot of people out there who are super talented, making new and great stuff.
Okay,
Like God's
awesome.
Fall, for instance. If you haven't listened to Aram Varshan's God's Fall, do yourself a favor. It's a very good show.
I have not yet. I've heard it recommended a few times. Right now, the only ones I listen to are ones that have kind of just started.
Mhm.
Uh, but I got on the ground floor, so to speak, like You Meet in a Tavern or Venture Maidens, which is an all female like
I've
DM and
heard good things
players.
about Venture Maidens. I haven't actually taken the plunge on that yet, but I just started following them on Twitter because I want to check that show out.
Yeah, they're really a fun show to listen to, and it's so nice to just like be able to listen to an all girl D&D group basically, and just have fun with how they treat their characters and go on the adventure with them. It's a great show.
Yeah, and I am so happy that there are so many all-female shows out there these days. That's something that a couple decades ago people would have thought was unheard of, and these days there are multiple entertainment properties built around that concept. Period.
And it's a good time. It's a good time to be in the gaming world and have, like what you said earlier, like starting having the equal parity for it be all inclusive at this point.
Yeah, yeah. I am happy with the progress that we've made in gaming, and I'm excited about where we could go. And I thankfully I think a lot of people who are leading the charge in this gaming entertainment thing are pushing to make gaming a more open hobby. And like you can see at conventions like Gen Con, like in amongst the younger crowd, there are a lot of different people there. It's not just what your stereotypical game store stereotype of white dudes with thick beards. There's a
Right.
lot of different people there, who have found this wonderful hobby and are happy to share it with us.
Now, James, you are starting a Kickstarter, and you are going to be producing a season of your actual play that's called the Dungeon Dome.
Yes, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the Dungeon Dome is sort of an experimental project for me, and also like an opportunity to really expand what I am able to do as an entertainer. Up to this point, I have worked a full-time job and also produced, all of the podcasts that I do. And
Hmm.
the Dungeon Dome is a Kickstarter. The primary thing that we're looking for in funding is enough money for me to be able to step away from my day job. Um, and I'm also going to use that opportunity to try out this new actual play concept, and experiment with some of the things that I was talking about earlier of creating a role playing experience that goes beyond just people at a table. And like we try to gamify the experience of people watching a show with us. And what I chose as inspiration for it was professional wrestling. Um, Professional wrestling is, I think, the world's largest and most successful LARP. Because kayfabe, we all know that these performers are just that. They're performers. They're doing very impressive stunts, but like nobody is like actually uh, they're not actually fighting in there, but they are telling these amazing sports storylines within the context of this fictional combat, and they don't break character at all. The WWE is this massive multimedia company with fictional properties that insists that they're real. It's like if Marvel and DC Comics were telling you that, oh no, Spider-Man and Batman are real people. We're just giving you a window into their stories. So, I find that super compelling and super interesting that there is this thing out there that's actually just actual play already. And the way it gets the audience wrapped up in it is by telling these soap opera-esque, larger than life combat stories. Going all the way back to the gladiatorial arenas. It's taking these fighters that have personalities, and it's creating grudges and alliances and breaking them apart. And in the thicket of it all, you are seeing people do very impressive athletic stunts. So with the Dungeon Dome, it's a gladiatorial arena. I'm having some performers from One Shot play characters who are these larger than life figures with big personalities. And I'm going to be creating match structures and game types that sort of stretch the different aspects of D&D and what makes it D&D. And I'm going to put them into challenges. So you're going to watch these entertaining people play these entertaining characters in storylines that have like ludicrously high stakes. Like the first Dungeon Dome match, the prize was a wish. So like if one of the people won a wish, they'd have this power to completely change the narrative of the world and really affect things in big ways. And there was a little bit of fixing that I did in that match. It wasn't a shoot. But like now with the Dungeon Dome that I'm going to be producing as a season, like I really want to give players the ability to play in that world so that you can watch a really compelling story unfold. And I'm taking inspiration from wrestling to do that. And I'm also taking the opportunity to impose a wrestling structure on my favorite Shakespeare play. That is going to be the B plot that we'll be running on throughout the first Dungeon Dome that I'm hoping the other Shakespeare nerds out there will catch. But on top of all of that, you're actually going to be watching an interesting D&D combat. Like the matches, some of them are death matches where people will just fight until one set of characters falls and the other set is victorious. But other matches, I am playing with D&D mechanics and D&D tropes and themes to tease out like a different sort of competitive environment. Like one of them is a treasure match where they'll be put in an arena and they will have a certain amount of time to run about the arena and open treasure chests to try and acquire more wealth than the opposing team. And you can do this by trying to attack your opponents and kill them so that you can grab more stuff than them, or you can do it by simply being faster than your enemies, getting more stuff, or you can be clever and set up traps for your enemies and take resources from them. And I want to see clever players put in that situation and how they would handle it. Set up a D&D combat where the stakes are not just life and death, where they're a little bit more interesting than that. And hopefully the audience will be excited to go on that ride as well.
That sounds incredibly amazing. And I imagine, are you going to be doing this? Are you going to be streaming live, or is it going to be recorded and then put up on like a YouTube channel? What's your platform as far as for people to consume?
The primary platform that I'm picturing for the Dungeon Dome is streaming. It started as part of the streaming initiative at One Shot, and like I definitely want to incubate it and develop it there. But I am also planning on putting up videos on demand on YouTube and offering higher quality videos on demand for people who back on Kickstarter. And just today, like a pretty large contingent of my audience came forward and asked if I could take the audio from Dungeon Dome matches and release them as podcasts.
I saw that.
Yeah, like I didn't know if people would be interested in that sort of thing, but I think it's the poll that I just ran feels to be pretty conclusive that there's a want for it as a podcast. So I will probably also be releasing these as podcast episodes as well. And I don't know. I'll have to like rip the audio from the initial Dungeon Dome and see how it plays out as a podcast and what I
Mm-hmm.
have to do to make that more compelling. But like part of the virtue of the Dungeon Dome is because it's streamed, people who are fans of the Dungeon Dome will be able to join the match and change what is happening as it happens. They will be able to cheer on their team, giving them special abilities. They will be able to vote for certain teams to live or die based on their performance. The streaming fans will be able to directly interact with the game world. And the people who back on Kickstarter will have the opportunity to do things like send us critical hits and critical fails. And they'll be able to decide how things play out because we'll draw randomly from our submissions and put them in actual matches. So people will be able to throw real curveballs to us. Other people will have the opportunity to submit items and things for people to actually find in the arena. And at the higher levels, like people will be able to send in monsters, have their D&D characters appear in some capacity in the Dungeon Dome, or like I think at the highest levels right now, our Dungeon Master level, you can design a match type with me. Like we will get together on Skype and we will talk through, a type of challenge that you would like to put in front of competitors in the dome at like really narrative gripping moments throughout the storyline. So I'm trying to create just a weird, unique experience and see how it works out. And that experience gets more interactive depending on, how much you invest in the Kickstarter itself.
Okay.
And
Well,
I'm also there's a podcast component to it as well. There are certain like side stories and things that I'll be telling within the Dungeon Dome universe that are exclusively coming out as podcasts. If you heard our Compass Cats adventure on One Shot, they'll be similar to that.
okay. Will you be releasing like your game rules or what you are using as far as Dungeon Dome for people, like if people back on the Kickstarter, like you get a PDF of, well, here's the general rule set or what we are doing to like facilitate the Dungeon Dome?
So at the end of season 1 for the Dungeon Dome, I'm going to take all the user generated content and keep it with, like the credits of the user who created it. And I'm going to take the rules that have developed because like I have some ideas for what the Dungeon Dome rules are.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that as I'm playing these games throughout season 1, I will come up with new ideas. I'm going to bind that together and give it to the Kickstarter backers as a PDF. And I don't know that you'll be able to play your own Dungeon Dome with that, but you will certainly have a document that you can use to make your games a little bit interesting and different. Using some of those user created items and or audience created items and challenges and traps. And put them in front of your own players, or you can stick your D&D group into the Dungeon Dome and see what
Mm-hmm.
happens there.
Absolutely. That was one of the things with my North Carolina group. I had moved out of state, and one of the things that I had did with them was like a play-by-post thing. But with 4th edition D&D, because you have the 4 like very specific, almost like World of Warcraft classes, like the tank and the healer and everything, I had them create like teams, and then they would test out the 4th edition combat rules on each other in like in like an arena setting.
Oh,
and
that's cool.
and it worked out because they were able to challenge each other as far as, well, if I do this with this weapon, does it negate the magic armor's special ability, even though it shouldn't? And like the magic armor should be able to do its ability back. And there's a lot of like rules lawyering, but is very cool, especially with 4th edition, how it was like laid out in that style where you had the different classes, and those classes were very much geared towards being the tank or being the healer, and just having that worked out. And I think with the Dungeon Dome concept, even if you have that book that you're going to put together, having that as just a guide would be incredible to like facilitate groups doing something similar. So
Yeah. I'm really hopeful for things that spring out of it. Again, if the Kickstarter is successful and like the Dungeon Dome ends up really resonating with people, I will probably have to create, like, I've been talking a lot in the fiction about the lower circuits.
Mhm.
And those are like theoretical Dungeon Dome style gladiator leagues happening in a D&D universe around the Dungeon Dome, but not quite part of it. And there's a project that I'm going to be doing part of season 1 for the Dungeon Dome called the Interdimensional Championship, where characters from one-shot podcasts and God's Fall and a couple other shows that happen to happen, in the Chicago area, are going to get together, and we're going to see, like, Trist Valentine enter the Interdimensional Championship and fight, some character from fight Inspector Jackie from One Shot or something like crazy like that. And so I like the idea of creating a game document that really takes the concepts in the Dungeon Dome and refines them into a rule system, so that I can create a lower circuit handbook so people will be able to run their own official Dungeon Dome games at their home table. But, a lot of that depends on us developing a unique rule set over the course of this first season, and
Mhm.
having an audience that's actually interested in seeing that sort of thing happen.
One of the things with Kickstarters is always the time, you do the Kickstarter, you pay the money, and then it turns into, well, how long is the product going to take from, okay, I've Kickstarted, to getting the product either to watch or to have it in my hand, etc. What's your and you might not even have that answer, but do you like
Actually, I
estimate
do.
of, oh, great.
So one of the interesting things about the Dungeon Dome, the reason that I have decided to do it now is because I want to do this Shakespeare subplot. There are a couple performers who I really want to play that out, who are going to be moving away, um, and they plan to leave Chicago by October. So I plan to finish Dungeon Dome season 1 by the end of October.
Okay. So
So pretty sure, like, the Kickstarter ends in August, and I think like in the last 2 weeks of August, probably I will start up Dungeon Dome season 1, and it will be going until the end of October.
wonderful. So if you are listening to this podcast episode and it is during that time of the Kickstarter, the links are going to be all over the place. So either on the podcast show notes, the Facebook page, the website, you can go and click on that to support the podcast. And what else can people do, James, to support the Dungeon Dome project on Kickstarter?
So because the Dungeon Dome is going to be a streamed thing, and because I want people to get caught up in the story, like, you will be able to watch the Dungeon Dome without having backed the Kickstarter. Backing the Kickstarter will get you access to higher quality, like VODs, and probably a podcast stream of the episodes, like, as there seems to be some demand for it. If you back at higher levels, you'll be able to interact with it to a greater degree than you would as a regular audience member. But if you are a person who just can't afford it, but are still interested in it, the best thing that you can do to help us out, apart from backing, is telling people about it. Retweet links that you see to the Dungeon Dome Kickstarter. Talk about it on forums. If you are intrigued by it and don't know if it's something that's going to be your thing, we have on our YouTube page right now archived Dungeon Dome matches that you'll be able to watch and see if it's the sort of thing that you're interested in. But yeah. Like the Kickstarter is essentially to just get the money to pay me and my performers to put up this performance, and then you guys as audience members will be able to start enjoying it very, very shortly after we fund.
And that is awesome. Now, is there anything else that I might have missed on the Dungeon Dome? Anything that needs to be out there for people to know?
Well, I think I could talk very shortly about the people who are going to be in it, because that might entice some people. The babyface characters that were the clear crowd favorites out of the first episodes of the Dungeon Dome that we did, Stephen Kropa and Mike Migdal are going to be reprising their role as the Compass Cats, which is a team of like very, very animated cat people who are also vampires. They're really weird, but incredibly funny. They're like these high adventure Errol Flynn type characters, but they're also cats and they're also vampires. And you might recognize those two performers as Binbon and Jubna from Campaign. If you've listened to their side quest episodes at all, you know those dudes are hilarious, and they are always put in a good performance. Kat Cool, who is the GM for Campaign, is going to be playing Starlight Surprise, who, spoilers for the initial Dungeon Dome, came in at the last minute to steal the championship away from our heels, who are played by Pat O'Rourke, who GMs the Dungeon Rats podcast, and Aram Varshan, who GMs God's Fall. They play these dark elf adventurers named Team Roxlet, and they are Jesse and Gary. They did a lot of very silly Pokemon jokes, but they also ended up being larger than life characters who are actively hostile to the audience in a very entertaining way. Allie Barthwell and Liz Anderson are going to be playing the murder. And we're also introducing Drew Merzieski and Bill Gordon as a team of Hellspawn Knights called the Nothing, and introducing Allie Grauer and Kate Booth as two like glam punk fairies called the Ladies' Disdain. And there will be other like surprise appearances from different characters throughout the first Dungeon Dome season. But that's our main cast. I have plotted out 15 like core plot Dungeon Dome streams, and there will be podcasts that are like interspersed with that to tell two fully fledged storylines. And I have some narrative threads that might form themselves into their own unique stories attached to those.
Well, it sounds like this Kickstarter project is going to have a lot of really fun stuff as far as the Dungeon Dome, and getting access to the good high quality videos on demand, and being involved, even just watching and being able to influence what goes on in the matches.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited to have like an audience actively participate in this stuff. It's going to be fun.
Anything else? I just want to make sure I'm covering everything that we can.
I think we've covered all the bases. I had a lot of fun.
All right, before I wrap this up, I do want to ask, who is your favorite professional wrestler?
Oh boy. So the period where I watched wrestling the most was in the 90s, and The Rock
Okay.
was always a favorite of mine, the People's Champion. But
Yep.
these days, and I don't watch too much wrestling these days, but the little that I do, Shinsuke Nakamura is awesome. That dude rocks so hard. I am very excited that he got called up to the main WWE league. And when like all those articles of people implying that WWE was trying to push him as the new John Cena, I could get down with that. I would be very happy if we just saw Shinsuke take over the entire WWE league.
Absolutely. Between him and AJ Styles, I would take both
I
of them
would
for the
love
next
to
3
see
to
a
5
Shinsuke
years.
Styles match. That is going to be bonkers.
It is. And, the benefit with Nakamura is not only is he a fantastic wrestler performer, his entrance music is phenomenal.
Oh, it's the best. I mean, his entrance ceremony, that dive down where he melts to the ground, it's so dramatic. It's so fucking cool.
It is. And getting to see, like, if they have the live violinist out there playing, and it's perfect. Just
I mean, his
wonderful.
his entrance into the WWE, like I watched it like 3 or 4 times. I like at first I was like hoping that there was a fight that I didn't get to see, but like when I realized that, oh no, this is just his entrance. It's just the coolest version of his entrance that there has ever been. I still got down watching it like 2 or 3 more times.
Now, James, for those who maybe this is their first time listening to you, which is going to be a shock, but that sometimes it happens. What are the best places to find you or your podcasts out there on social media or to subscribe?
So if you haven't checked out One Shot yet, you can find the show and like not just One Shot, but the many wonderful shows on the One Shot Network at oneshotpodcast.com. We have actual play shows like One Shot, Campaign, Adventure, and the Neo Scum. We also have interview shows like Talking Tabletop, Backstory, and Modifier, and discussion shows like System Mastery as part of our network. So please head over to One Shot and check that out. I am so proud of all the shows that we put out, and I think there's something for everyone. So long as you like things to be on the funnier side. I think our interview programs are some of the most dramatic things that we do on the network, but pretty much everything else is like lighter and with a laugh. But yeah. Please check us out there. We are on all the major podcatchers. So if you search for One Shot or Campaign, we should be among the first results. And you just need to take a look at the website to see what our logo looks like in order to find us. If you want to talk to me, you can head over to Twitter. That's where I hang out and talk to fans the most. I am at One Shot RPG on Twitter.
Awesome. And for everyone, the show links will have all of the links to the website and the Twitter and pretty much everything that you do. So it's easy to click on. And James, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule. I know you are extremely busy with not only obviously the full-time job, but everything else that you do for your podcast and the network. And it has been my pleasure to have you come on. It is something that I couldn't have ever expected, so I just have to say thank you.
Well, seriously, thank you for having me. Like, it's always awesome to talk to people out there. Like, I love doing interviews, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about this project because I'm very excited about it.
As am I, and I'm very much looking forward to being a backer as soon as it is available out there. Which, when this podcast comes out, it will be available.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Tales from the Fandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.